Hey everyone, welcome back to Totally Forkable. Today I'm going to be talking about the Great British Bake Off and discussing the cognitive dissonance that is often on display by the bakers and also at times the show in general. If you're not familiar with the term cognitive dissonance, what it means, I'm going to go into that. I'm also going to talk about my thoughts and opinions on the show in general, but first I need to discuss a few things right off the bat. Something I was very confused about was the title of the show. In Britain, it's called The Great British Bake Off. In the US, it's called The Great British Baking Show. It's exactly the same show, but there were some copyright issues when they were bringing it into the US. Apparently, Pillsbury owns the rights to the term Bake Off, so they had to change the title for the US, but it's exactly the same show. Also making things even more confusing is that the way that Netflix has the show organized and labeled doesn't really make sense. So basically, Netflix has the show organized into collections, but the collection numbers don't correspond with the actual season numbers. So for example, the most recent season of the show was season 12, but Netflix has that listed as collection 9. For the sake of simplicity, because I'm in the US and most of my viewers are in the US, I am going to be referring to the seasons and the episodes I'm talking about by the Netflix collection numbers. So on to my thoughts on the Bake Off in general. As a vegan, I don't watch cooking shows. As you can imagine, it's pretty unpleasant when you're someone who is morally opposed to the killing and exploitation and utilization of animals in our food system to see people working with and manipulating and utilizing and eating animal flesh. It's just not something that I want to do when I'm trying to relax and unwind. I thought it might be different with baking because this is cognitive dissonance on my part, but somehow seeing dairy and eggs felt a little bit less visceral to me than seeing meat. I personally know that the dairy and egg industries are just as cruel and exploitative as the meat industries, but like I said, there's just something mentally about it that is somehow easier for me to digest visually. So I decided to try watching Bake Off. Paul and I have both heard a ton about it. Of course, it has so much hype. And over the holidays, we decided to watch the most recent season, so Collection 9, and we loved it. Anyone who's watched Bake Off knows the show is just so joyful. It's so lighthearted and it's such a feel-good show. It's really easy to watch. It's got this sort of ASMR aspect to it where the music and the voices, the voiceovers, the setting, everything is just very calming. Additionally, everyone on the show is wonderful, from the judges to the hosts to the contestants, which I'll talk about. So I personally have really enjoyed it and I've watched about 3 seasons so far. But having said that, there are definitely a lot of moments that stood out, made me upset for one reason or another, and those are the moments that I'm going to be discussing today. Like I said, they pick the most wonderful people to be on the show, and I don't believe that any of these people would knowingly or deliberately see an animal in front of them and be like, I want that animal to feel harm. But I think that's why pointing this out is important to me, because you can be a good person and also display hypocritical viewpoints and show signs of cognitive dissonance. The two aren't mutually exclusive. I think it's more of an indication of the society we live in and how embedded these viewpoints are in our consciousness rather than a reflection of the morality of these specific people. Since it's baking, they do mostly deal with sweet flavors, but occasionally, I would say pretty often actually, they deal with savory flavors, and that is where all of my examples of cognitive dissonance that I'm going to be discussing come from the savory challenges. Interestingly though, even in the sweet bakes, there are so many ingredients used that aren't even vegetarian, like gelatin, lard, and suet, which I didn't even know what suet was. I wish I never knew. And it just is crazy to me because I wonder how many vegetarians have eaten baked goods that have these products in them that aren't even vegetarian and just don't even realize it, because who would think that there would be boiled pig cartilage in a cake, you know? So let's talk about what cognitive dissonance is. The definition is the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change. The concept of cognitive dissonance, the term cognitive dissonance, was coined by the social psychologist Leon Festinger in 1956. 57, he proposed that a person who experiences internal inconsistency tends to become psychologically uncomfortable and is motivated to reduce the cognitive dissonance. They tend to make changes to justify the stressful behavior, either by adding new parts to the cognition, causing the psychological dissonance, i.e. rationalization, or by avoiding the circumstances and contradictory information likely to increase the magnitude of the cognitive dissonance, aka confirmation bias. So on the rationalization end of the spectrum, maybe you would have someone who is being confronted with the horrors of the animal agriculture industry, and maybe that will bother them and they'll be thinking about it, and then they might say to themselves, well, I only buy my meat from humane sources. So that's how they resolve that cognitive dissonance. Or confirmation bias would be an example of stopping eating animals. When you have these thoughts, you change the behavior to match the thoughts that you're having. Guys, I only took Psych 101 in college. I'm not sure how accurate my description is, but that is sort of the basis of cognitive dissonance. It's sort of a tricky concept to describe, I think, but once you understand it and start seeing it, you kind of start seeing it everywhere. Even though it seems like it's supposed to be more of a personal thing, like I can't know for sure whether or not someone else is experiencing cognitive dissonance. You can sort of see the signs. That's really what I'm going to be pointing out today. Is cognitive dissonance the same as hypocrisy? Because it does sound kind of similar to hypocrisy. No, hypocrisy involves a contradiction between a person's supposed principles, beliefs, or character and who they really are or how they behave. Cognitive dissonance is the unpleasant mental state that may result if someone really does have certain beliefs but thinks or acts in a way that contradicts them. So hypocrisy would be the best example I can give on this channel would be someone saying that they're vegan, but then knowingly harming animals. The situations I'm going to be discussing could be their own specific brand of cognitive dissonance. Like there could be and should be a term for this type of cognitive dissonance. And I searched and searched and tried to find any discussion about it, and I really couldn't find it. And I don't even know what we would call it, but it's basically people surrounding themselves with aesthetically pleasing images of animals whose very same body parts they are chopping up and preparing to eat. This heavily ties it into the farmhouse chic style of decor, which is, I think it was like an 80s interior decorating trend. I haven't been able to exactly figure out when it really started booming, but it's when people have in their kitchens just all of these images of farm animals, whether it's paintings or photographs or little statues. It's very common. I happen to grow up in a household where my mom still is a very big fan of this style of decor. I don't really get it. I don't think it's particularly attractive, and I think there's something obviously very morbid about being like, oh, look at my little cow and pig tea towels while you're preparing beef and pork. I do know conversely that some vegans like to have imagery of farm animals in their kitchen as a sort of celebration of farm animals and reminding themselves on a daily basis why they don't exploit them for food. But yes, you will see this phenomenon in all the clips I'm going to be discussing. Last thing before we get into the clips, I want to point something out that I see as a really positive thing, which is Bake Off's acknowledgement of veganism in a number of different ways. And these are just from the seasons that I've watched. I'm sure that there are other things from other seasons that I haven't watched, but in collection 6, they had a vegan week. So they had an entire episode where all of the challenges were vegan challenges. And then in collection 9, they did a free from week where a dairy-free challenge, a vegan challenge, and a gluten-free challenge. And then in collection 9, so the most recent season, they had Freya, who was a completely vegan baker. And it was just so exciting to see this vegan baker holding her own with all of the traditional bakers.
I'm really nervous. So the vegan substitutes for this week are definitely not as easy to use. People were like, oh, why don't you just bail out? And I was like, no, stick by your morals.
She did still have to use animal products in the technical challenges, which I think was kind of probably very difficult for her. But I do applaud them for taking a chance and incorporating a vegan baker, and I hope that that will just continue. And also, I think a lot of amateur bakers who watch the show probably watch the show looking for different ideas and techniques to use. So when they see Freya, for example, making aquafaba, maybe some people learned that day that you can use chickpea water instead of egg whites. Overall, there's a lot to celebrate on that front, but there's also a lot to critique, so let's get into it. Collection 8, episode 6 was Japanese Week. This episode got a lot of flack for the way that they handled it in general. I wasn't watching the show at that time, so I wasn't involved in sort of the discourse at the time, but I have seen mentions of it on Reddit. And there's also this Eater article that goes into everything wrong and problematic with how they handle Japanese Week. I'll link this article below because it's really insightful. I feel like that could be a whole video in and of itself. It's not something that I really feel qualified to discuss. So I'm just going to stick to the specific moments of cognitive dissonance that stood out to me. So the signature challenge for this week is to make Japanese buns. Now these are technically called Nikuman buns, and the Eater article points out that these are actually traditionally Chinese buns, not Japanese buns. So they chose to have them make a bun that wasn't even a traditional Japanese bun. That was definitely one of the critiques, and they said that they could fill them with a sweet or savory filling, but it seems like everyone picked savory. Laura, Dave, and Peter all choose to decorate their buns to look like whatever animal's meat is inside the buns.
The plan is they're going to look like little chickens.
Naturally adding colour to his buns with turmeric, Dave will then be filling them with his favourite meal.
I'm making little piggies, like little snouts and ears, and sesame seeds for eyes. It's quite a fun challenge, I think, isn't it?
I'm going to be making my wee buns into wee lambs. The lamb itself is going to be raw, and that's going to be steamed in with the bun.
Peter even calls the lambs cute while he's describing them to the judges.
And that's going to be used for the face and for the ears. Just cut out wee shapes. They look really quite cute.
Great, thank
I hope you enjoy it.
You know, this is what's so bizarre to me, is that he's simultaneously marveling at how cute they are while unflinchingly cooking with their slaughtered body parts. I can't say for sure what's going on inside Peter's mind, but that to me is a display of cognitive dissonance, kind of like celebrating the animal while torturing it. And I found this whole challenge in these 3 bakers' decorations really interesting because, like I said, a lot of people tend to separate the animal from the meat, but in this case, they're not separating them at all. They're kind of combining the imagery of the animal with the animal's meat. Like, sure, I guess it technically makes sense, but it's just a little on the nose for me. Not really my artistic style. And I do find this type of cognitive dissonance the most kind of hard to understand because you're really just, there's no denying what you're doing. You're not pretending to not understand that this meat comes from an actual animal. In fact, you're making cute versions of them as the decoration to your buns. I found this clip really interesting.
These are the little snouts for my little piggies. I feel like I'm going to get a lot of hate online from vegetarians worldwide for this.
The fact that she's recognizing that other people might be mad about this indicates that there's something in her mind that she understands that maybe there's something wrong or amiss about this. It seems to me like she's experiencing the cognitive dissonance, but instead of being like, I know this is kind of weird, she's just like, vegetarians are going to be upset. I actually really liked that moment because, I don't know, it made me be like, oh, Laura's kind of making the connection a little bit. Peter ends up displaying his sheep in a field or a pen type of thing. Placing them on grass in a natural habitat is just kind of furthering their humanity or animality, like bringing them to life in a way. And Laura, when she's plating her buns, says,
Oh, they don't look very good. Poor little piggy.
Yeah, you think. So let's move on to collection 5, episode 6. In this challenge, the bakers were tasked with making hand-raised pies with hot watercress pastry. Wouldn't even know the first thing about how to make that if you asked me, so better them than me. This is what Sophie chooses to make.
Sophie's watertight pie crust will be topped with forest fruits and filled with venison, rabbit, wild boar and guinea fowl. Sophie is decorating her game pie, which is filled with rabbit, venison, wild boar, and guinea fowl with forest fruits. So she's decorating her pie that is filled with animals that live in the forest with berries and fruits from the forest that these animals may have presumably
eaten in their natural lifetime in the forest. It just brings to mind this really disturbing imagery of maybe a deer leaning over to nibble on some berries, and then bang, a gun goes off and kills him. And it's just like, yeah, this is what he wanted to eat while he was alive, but we killed him and we're putting him in this pie. So here you go, buddy. Like sprinkling the food that they would have loved on top of their grave. Very disturbing to me. And you know, she didn't just say I'm topping the pie with berries. They were specifically called forest berries. It was deliberate for these two things to be grouped together. It was part of the theme. Again, not a knock on the person at all. I really, really liked Sophie. I thought she was so incredibly sweet and mature. She was one of my favorite contestants on the show. I don't think Sophie's a bad person, but this particular decision I found pretty disturbing, and again, probably something that she herself was just pretty disconnected about. Continuing with collection 5, episode 8 was Forgotten Bakes Week. So these were baked goods that aren't as common anymore, but that were really popular at one time. For the signature challenge, they asked them to make clangers. So this was a really interesting concept. I had never heard of clangers before. I guess that's why they're forgotten bakes, but basically it's a long, slim pastry, and it's filled on one end with a savory filling, and then on the other end with a sweet filling. So it's meant to be that you could bring it and have it as just a all-in-one lunch. So you would just eat the savory end for lunch, and then you just keep eating, and then you'd get your dessert. And I just think that was such a cool concept. Sophie, her savory part of her clanger had pork in it, and she put a little cutout pig sort of on that end to distinguish, like, this is the savory end. I mean, I get why you would want to put something on one end to distinguish the savory end from the sweet end, and I think all the bakers did this. That might have even been part of the assignment. So during the tasting, then one of the hosts says,
I love the pig. Love the pig.
And, you know, this was just further pointing out the fact that there's a pig on the pork end of the clanger, and I just felt like, why do you love it? Do you love it because you love pigs? Is it cute? It's not that particularly clever, in my opinion, so the whole thing kind of baffles me. Moving on to collection 6, episode 6, the showstopper challenge was to make a shaped banquet pie. For Dan's showstopper, he makes a salmon-shaped pie with salmon inside. Again, very on the nose, decorating the pie to look like exactly what's on the inside.
But my reaction is just that it doesn't look appetizing. I don't want to eat it, partly because it's so good. It looks like a great raw fish sitting there.
But then if we compare this to what Kim Joy made,
I am making a mermaid pie, and it's called Silka the Vegetarian Mermaid.
I found Kim Joy's choice to be very interesting. It was clearly a deliberate choice to make the mermaid vegetarian, because mermaids most likely would be vegetarian if they existed. I don't think that they would eat fish. And then moving on to collection 9, episode 6, the showstopper challenge was to make a terrine pie with an ornate pastry decoration on the outside and a design on the inside. Lizzie's pie is filled with salmon, much like Dan. She chooses a fish decoration on the outside and the inside. In her case, she claims that the outside decoration is supposed to be a mermaid tail. That's close enough to an actual fish for me, and whereas you have Kim Joy deliberately putting a vegetarian filling in her mermaid decorated pie, here we have, you know, fish decorations and fish inside the pie. I don't really think the mermaid would be too excited that you killed her friends, just personally. And then finally we have Amanda, who chooses to accompany her bacon-filled pie with small pork-filled piglets.
My sausage is done. So I'm making my little piggies. Here's one.
I haven't watched every season of Bake Off, but I know that if and when I do, I'm probably going to find lots more examples like this. It seems to be a trend. Why do I feel this is important to even point out or make a video about? I think it's important to point out because this is the type of thing that probably wouldn't stand out to everybody. You know, a lot of people probably watch the show, don't even think twice of it, maybe even think it's funny or cute, but I think it's the type of thing that once you're aware of it, maybe you will start noticing it more. Why does this even matter in the grand scheme of things? Like I said, I think it's a reflection of the societal flaw that allows humans to completely disconnect animals from their flesh. And ultimately, this enables humans to inflict large amounts of pain and suffering onto animals, or pay for pain and suffering to happen to animals. And that's ultimately the big problem to me. Like I said, I really do love the Bake Off. I think it's a great show. They obviously have some improvements to make in a lot of different areas. I personally am happy and grateful to see the steps they've taken forward into incorporating vegan bakers and vegan items into their challenges. Yeah, like I said, the savory weeks are just hard to watch, and they probably always will be unless more and more people are making vegetarian fillings, which hopefully will be the case. We'll see. But I hope that this video helped you think a little more critically about the show in general and some of their depictions of animals and kind of flippant ignorance of animal suffering. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on Bake Off and specifically the situations that I discussed here. Subscribe to my channel for more of my content, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!